Shirley MacLaine, an Oscar-winning legend who never shied away from speaking her mind or making enemies. Throughout her 6-decade career, she clashed with some of Hollywood's most powerful names, from difficult directors to unbearable co-stars. But only one person ever pushed her to the point where she confessed, "I truly hated him more than anyone." Who was he and what happened that made her say she could never forgive him? Firestorms in the Desert, when Shirley faced off with Clint Eastwood. In 1970, Shirley MacLaine was riding a wave of success. She had just come off her dazzling performance in Sweet Charity, a musical that earned her another Golden Globe nomination. She was at the top of her game. That's when Universal Pictures came calling with a gritty Western, Two Mules for Sister Sarah, directed by Don Siegel, and co-starring the rising tough guy icon, Clint Eastwood. It seemed like a strange pairing from the start. Eastwood, already known for his quiet, gunslinging masculinity, and Shirley, a fiercely articulate, expressive performer with an intense presence. Originally, the role of Sister Sarah was written for Elizabeth Taylor, but when she declined, Shirley stepped in. That decision set the tone for a clash that would ripple through the entire shoot. Don Siegel, a hard-edged director with no patience for what he called emotional indulgence, didn't take to Shirley from the beginning. He admitted in interviews that he found her too assertive, too vocal, and not feminine enough for the role. That word, unfeminine, would haunt Shirley throughout her career, thrown at her any time she dared to challenge the men she worked with. Filming began in the punishing heat of Mexico. Temperatures soared, water was unreliable, food made people sick, and tempers flared. Shirley, who had no problem expressing discomfort or setting boundaries, clashed frequently with both Siegel and Eastwood. She questioned blocking, rewrote lines, and refused to be silent when something didn't feel right. To the men on set, this was insubordination. To Shirley, it was just doing the work right. In one infamous moment, Eastwood reportedly stormed off set after Shirley confronted him about refusing to rehearse. The tension got so bad that at one point, both Eastwood and Siegel allegedly told producers they would never work with her again. After filming wrapped, they made good on that promise. Eastwood never acted alongside Shirley again. Siegel never hired her for any of his future projects, and in Shirley's memoirs, there's not a single mention of Clint Eastwood, not even a passing reference. That silence said more than words ever could. Years later, when asked about Eastwood, Shirley offered a more nuanced take. She praised his strength and his screen presence, but added, almost as a side note, that he once punched a horse on set out of frustration. It was a classic MacLaine move: compliment, then cut, as if to say, "I respect you, but don't think I've forgotten." Still, Clint Eastwood wasn't the one she hated most. The worst was yet to come. Live on air, the night Shirley walked out on David Letterman. By the late 1980s, Shirley MacLaine had evolved far beyond the roles that made her famous. She was no longer just an actress. She was now a best-selling author, a vocal advocate for spiritual awakening, and a public face of New Age belief systems in mainstream media. Her book, Out on a Limb, had stirred controversy and fascination, detailing her belief in reincarnation, past lives, and metaphysical experiences. She knew the subject was polarizing, but she didn't expect a televised ambush. In October 1988, Shirley appeared on Late Night with David Letterman to promote her film, Madame Susatska. What was meant to be a light-hearted promotional appearance quickly turned into one of the most uncomfortable talk show interviews in television history. Letterman, known for his sarcasm and sometimes combative interviewing style, was in rare form that night. Before Shirley even walked on stage, he cracked jokes about her beliefs. Once seated, he didn't ask about her movie. He asked if she believed she'd lived as a monk, then as an Atlantean, then a harem dancer. Each question more mocking than the last. At first, Shirley kept her composure. She tried to explain that her beliefs were shaped by time spent in Asia, where reincarnation wasn't fringe, it was cultural. But the smirk never left Letterman's face. The audience laughed uncomfortably. Shirley's tone began to shift. Looking directly at Letterman, she quoted Cher, another celebrity who had previously clashed with the host. Maybe Cher was right. Maybe you are an, she said, cutting herself off before finishing the insult. The audience gasped. Letterman looked stunned. For a moment, the air in the studio felt dense with unspoken tension. They cut to commercial. And when the show returned, Shirley was gone. She had walked out, refusing to play along any further. In a later interview, she said she simply didn't want to be made a punchline for her deeply held beliefs. "I wasn't angry," she said, "but I wasn't going to let him trivialize something that matters to me." Letterman, for his part, addressed the incident in the years that followed. He admitted to misjudging the interview, to pushing too hard, but true to form, he couldn't resist a final jab, saying that when Shirley reached out to touch his hair during the taping, he wanted to swat her. It was petty, it was public, and for Shirley, it was over. She never returned to his show. From 1988 to his retirement in 2015, her absence was both a statement and a silence. And yet, for all the awkwardness, even for all the mockery, Shirley never described Letterman as the person she truly hated. She was frustrated by him. She was disappointed in the experience. But it didn't cut to the core. When genius turns to poison, the Anthony Hopkins showdown. By the time Shirley MacLaine signed on to star in A Change of Seasons in 1980, she had already proven herself as one of the most versatile actresses in Hollywood. The film promised complexity, a sharp adult story of infidelity, jealousy, and marital reinvention. Her co-star, a then-rising British talent known for his brooding intensity, Sir Anthony Hopkins. On paper, it was an inspired pairing. Two gifted actors, both known for their commitment to craft, portraying a marriage unraveling in real time. But the reality on set was a nightmare. The friction between MacLaine and Hopkins would go on to become one of the most notoriously toxic partnerships in her career, if not the worst. From the start, their energies clashed. Shirley was direct, often playful, but unafraid to challenge a scene's logic or direction. Hopkins, already battling alcoholism and inner demons, approached the role and the world through a stormier lens. The two butted heads over tone, rehearsal styles, and interpretation. What should have been passionate tension on-screen began spilling uncontrollably off-screen. Shirley, used to strong personalities, had worked with Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Jack Lemmon. She had seen ego, but Hopkins was something else. He wasn't arrogant. He was dismissive, cold, distant. She later described him as angry and unreachable. Conversations, when they happened, were short and cutting, and by the third week of shooting, the two were barely speaking unless the camera was rolling. Years later, Hopkins gave the public a window into how deep the bitterness had run. In an interview, when asked which actor he least enjoyed working with, he didn't hesitate. "Shirley MacLaine," he said. "She's the most obnoxious actress I've ever worked with." The quote was harsh, but what made it worse was that Shirley had never publicly insulted him. Until then. In response, she simply said that Hopkins was struggling with a serious drinking problem at the time. She didn't vilify him. She didn't bite back. But she didn't forgive him either. Those who worked on the film later recalled how the set felt like a pressure cooker. "It was miserable," one crew member told a journalist. "You could feel the contempt in the air." The film's director, Richard Lang, reportedly tried to mediate, but gave up by the halfway point, simply hoping both leads would remain professional enough to get through their scenes. When A Change of Seasons premiered, critics savaged it. The dialogue was wooden. The chemistry was dead. The timing was off. It received several Razzie nominations and is remembered today mostly for what happened behind the scenes, not on screen. Hopkins, of course, would go on to win an Oscar for The Silence of the Lambs. MacLaine would reclaim glory just a few years later in terms of endearment. But they would never speak again, never reconcile, never acknowledge each other beyond that brief exchange of contempt. Turbulent brilliance, the unforgettable feud with Deborah Winger. In 1983, Shirley MacLaine stood at the edge of one of the greatest triumphs of her career. She had just completed work on Terms of Endearment, a film that would go on to sweep the Oscars and earn her long-overdue recognition as one of Hollywood's true greats. But behind the camera, that project was anything but sweet. At the heart of it all was her co-star, Deborah Winger. The premise was powerful, a mother and daughter navigating love, loss, and decades of complicated emotions. Shirley played Aurora Greenway, a refined, overbearing, emotionally fragile matriarch. Winger played her spirited, rebellious daughter, Emma. And while their on-screen chemistry sizzled with tension, it wasn't acting. The strain between them was very, very real. When the cameras stopped, so did the civility. It began with small things, missed cues, eye rolls, subtle slights. But it escalated fast. Shirley, a disciplined actress who valued professionalism and control, found herself face-to-face with Winger's chaotic, raw, unpredictable energy. Winger would refuse rehearsals, change lines, and challenge direction on the fly. She thrived on emotional volatility, while Shirley demanded order. The set became a battleground. One story, now infamous in Hollywood lore, tells of Winger allegedly farting in MacLaine's direction during a heated argument. Another tale claims she licked Shirley's leg during a scene with Jack Nicholson, entirely unscripted. Winger never denied these incidents outright. When pressed years later, she offered a smirk and a cryptic, "There may be some truth to that." For Shirley, it wasn't just the behavior, it was the disrespect. Still, she never walked off set, never gave up. She channeled her frustration into Aurora, that subtle seething beneath the surface. The emotional restraint turned acid. What audiences saw as masterful acting was, in part, real-life irritation channeled through the role. Director James L. Brooks reportedly spent much of the shoot walking a diplomatic tightrope. He adored both actresses, but couldn't deny the storm brewing between them. At one point, he separated their trailers by an extra 100 yards, just to maintain peace. And yet, something incredible happened. That conflict, the tension, the distance, the hostility, it all poured into the film. Terms of Endearment became a masterpiece of emotional storytelling. Every scene between Shirley and Deborah crackled with authenticity because the emotion wasn't feigned, it was lived. When Oscar night arrived, both actresses were nominated for Best Actress. They sat just feet from each other. Winger, 28 years younger, had earned critical praise for her daring vulnerability. Shirley, with decades of experience, was finally receiving the industry's full respect. The tension in the air was undeniable. Then the announcement, Shirley MacLaine had won. She took the stage to thunderous applause and began her speech with a line that said it all. "I deserve this." It was both celebratory and pointed, a nod to her journey, a jab at the chaos she endured, a release after years of being the underestimated one. She then acknowledged Winger, describing her performance as turbulent brilliance. It was honest, not warm, not affectionate, but honest. And it revealed what Shirley really felt. Admiration clouded by exhaustion. They never worked together again. And to this day, Shirley has not spoken publicly of wanting to. Steel, stardom, and silence. Why Shirley MacLaine outlasted them all. By the 1990s, Shirley MacLaine had become more than a Hollywood icon. She was a cultural force. She had survived the studio system, battled directors, walked out on talk show hosts, and gone toe-to-toe with some of the most notoriously difficult actors in the business. She was no longer just Aurora, Fran Kubelik, or Irma la Douce. She was Shirley MacLaine, Unfiltered and unshaken, she didn't conform to anyone's idea of how a woman in show business should behave. She was assertive, often blunt. She didn't play the ingenue or the submissive co-star. She fought studio contracts in court, challenged casting decisions, and refused to apologize for her opinions, be they political, spiritual, or deeply personal. The 1970s had bruised her reputation. Her decision to sue 20th Century Fox over the cancellation of Bloomer Girl marked her in the industry as difficult. But Shirley never backed down. She knew what she was worth, and she demanded to be treated accordingly. The label of unfeminine, so often thrown her way by men like Don Siegel, never slowed her down. She wore it like armor. In many ways, the very traits that made her polarizing also made her indestructible. She returned to form in the late 70s with The Turning Point, a role that mirrored her early ballet dreams, and cemented her comeback with Being There and Terms of Endearment. Her performance as Aurora Greenway became one of the defining roles of her generation, earning her the Best Actress Oscar and a standing ovation that felt like a collective apology from Hollywood for all the years they had underestimated her. In the years that followed, she starred in Steel Magnolias, Postcards from the Edge, Bernie, and even showed up in Downton Abbey, reminding audiences and colleagues alike that she was still here, still sharp, still relevant. Younger actors respected her. Jack Black praised her professionalism and energy on the set of Bernie. Jennifer Aniston and Toni Collette gushed about working with a legend. She had turned her outsider reputation into an asset, becoming the grand dame of no-nonsense wisdom. In her memoirs, she gave entire chapters to her spiritual revelations, romantic heartbreaks, and behind-the-scenes insights. But when it came to Hopkins, there was no apology, no softening, no trace of humor, just a frozen moment in time, preserved in frustration and regret. To Shirley, he wasn't just a co-star who clashed. He was the one who crossed a line and never returned. In a career filled with wild personalities, Frank Sinatra's Wild Parties, Clint Eastwood's Icy Distance, Deborah Winger's Chaos, and David Letterman's Mockery, it was Anthony Hopkins' cruelty that lingered the longest. Because while others annoyed or challenged her, he wounded her, publicly, permanently. And yet, as with everything in Shirley's life, she moved forward. She never let bitterness become her brand. She continued writing, acting, and speaking her truth, never seeking revenge, only clarity. She outlasted most of her rivals. She became a symbol of feminine endurance in an industry built to swallow women whole.